Welcome to the Siljander Podcast, where you will find actionable tips, tricks, and strategies for the millennials. In this show, we will dive into content that will teach you how to live with more ease, confidence, and authenticity. Here we will start with a foundation of compassion for ourselves, and then spread that compassion to others. We believe that this chain of acceptance and fortitude can radically change our families, communities, and beyond. And I am your host, Laura Siljander, yoga teacher, mental health coach, outdoor enthusiast, and lover of red wine. So grab your headphones and get ready to learn, grow, and to be inspired to live a life filled with intention and wellness. If you like the show, follow me on Instagram at practice_compassion, or check out my website, laurasiljander.com. I am so glad you are here, and I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome back. Thank you again for joining me this week for the Siljander Podcast. This week, I am packing up our household, which is my spouse and our very old dog, and we are heading out west for the holidays. So if you're listening sort of live or when these come out, it is December, and people are gearing up for their different traditions and holiday events. I've talked a little bit about going out west in my other podcast, I think my first one. So we have a new camper named Cooper. It's a she, is a 16-foot scamp. So if you're really interested in watching our travels, where we're going, what we're eating, what I'm cooking, where we're camping and mountain biking and doing who knows what else, you can follow along on Instagram. I post on it all the time. So yes, if you're interested in traveling or vegan cuisine on the road or what our rig looks like, we are renovating Cooper right now. Again, it's a 16-foot scamp, and we just bought her. We upgraded it from a 13-foot to a 16-foot so I can take this show on the road. But that's enough about me. What I really want to talk to you all about this week is a topic that we partake in every single day, and that is communication. So communication is something that we do within ourselves and others. And when I say we do it within ourselves, it's we are constantly telling our bodies what we need, what we want. A good example could be maybe your belly feels a little bit off and you think maybe you need some kombucha in your life. Or maybe you stayed up way too late binging on something on Netflix and you only got 6 hours of sleep rather than 8. So your body is telling your mind, I'm tired, I'm sluggish, and perhaps that kind of sets the stage for your day. So that's communication internally, but there's also so much communication that happens externally. That could be with the barista who's serving you your dirty chai, or it could be with your spouse, roommate, best friend. And a lot of arguments can stem from miscommunication. And a lot of great things can happen from good communication skills. So if you consider yourself a master communicator, maybe some of these tools you could add to your arsenal. If you think that this is an area you can improve on, I have 4 strategies for you. One of them is a pretty big strategy, and I want to go over that more in depth on another podcast, but I want to cover it briefly today. But first, before we do that, let's get on the same page of what communication is, the definition. So I'm going to put on my little teacher hat because you know I work at UNCW, and I'm going to go over this definition just so we can all start on even playing ground. Communication is receiving information, processing information, and transmitting information. Communication is receiving, processing, and transmitting information. This can occur between just you and one other person, or you and many, many other people. It doesn't matter who the audience, you're constantly communicating, whether you know it or realize it or not. The first strategy is strategy 1, and this is that bigger topic I want to dive into a little bit deeper on a later episode, but that's self-talk or your internal dialogue. This is the communication that you have with yourself. So how well you communicate with yourself can affect how you communicate with others. We all have this endless chatter occurring internally. This chatter can be responsible for building your self-identity, such as who you are and what you're worth. And this internal dialogue can affect your internal environment and how you view and feel yourself. So if you are feeling full of confidence, you're feeling great about yourself, your internal dialogue is on fleek, and you are so stoked to be you, that's going to show. If you are feeling insecure, not feeling like you are enough, and you've got a lot of inner turmoil, that's going to show up in your inner communication as well. If you speak negatively about yourself, if your internal dialogue is on a repetitive track, saying things such as you are not smart enough or thin enough or maybe brave enough, this will more than likely show through in your conversations with others. It can show through your conversations if you are constantly self-deprecating all over people and you're constantly bringing the conversation to something negative. So we all know those people, or this could be you, who they're just negative, and sometimes it's really hard to talk to them. They say things, or maybe this is you, such as, oh, I probably won't find a good parking spot, or I'm not even going to try to enter that contest because I won't win, or there's a flu epidemic going around, I'll probably get sick. It's conversations like this that turn that person, or hopefully not, but it could be you, into someone that people almost will start avoiding. Manifesting these negative things in your mind and then saying them out loud is like planting a seed of negativity and expecting a fruitful tree to grow. If you want a fruitful conversation, then you need to start by talking to yourself as if you were a dear friend, and talking to yourself with compassion, with empathy, and hope, being a little bit more gentle with yourself. So it starts really with you. Sometimes this is when I'll ask someone, if I notice that they're really negative, to pause and reflect when you are in a self-talk cycle and think about if this is helpful or is it hurtful. And this is when I try to use the ooey gooey, feely, squishy words of self-compassion and loving yourself. And this is something that I really want to dive into on a bigger podcast. But having a good conversation with others starts with you having a good conversation with yourself. You'll notice if you are bringing the conversation to a more positive light, or at least a more hopeful light, people are going to be attracted to you. They're going to want to talk to you because it feels good to talk to you. It feels good to be around you. If you're that person who constantly is negative, then people might start to avoid you or get annoyed with you. Now, I'm not saying that you always have to be positive and hopeful. No way. But I also don't want you to always be negative. It's okay to vent sometimes. It's okay to have bad days, bad weeks, or a bad situation that happens to you. But if you are always that negative person, always that really high-strung person, that's when it's time to start to do some self-work. And like I said, we'll get into this more on a later episode. So self-talk, your internal environment, is number one. How are you talking to yourself? Because that does transcend on how you communicate with others. Number two, you might roll your eyes. Names. Okay, we've all heard, I am so bad with names. I'm terrible with names. I won't remember your name. But the truth is, you are completely capable of learning someone's name. You're smart enough. If we're being real, you're not making it a priority. That's it. You can do it. When you remember someone's name, it communicates to that person you are talking to that you care enough to remember their name. This can build trust and rapport. It's also a really great way to get someone's attention. So let's say you're out on a Friday night at the local brewery and you're trying a bunch of craft beer and it's busy and it just opened and everyone's there, and your friend will say, Christy, is coming towards you, but she doesn't see you. Or maybe it's someone that you just met, or maybe it's your waiter and you're trying to get another flight. It helps to say, hey, Christy, or to know your waiter's name to get their attention. It's a lot easier than saying, hey, you with the face. It's also a sign of courtesy, and it's a way of recognizing someone. When someone remembers our name after meeting us, we feel a little bit more respected and important. And it's such an easy way that leaves a lasting impression of positivity. So have you ever just met someone and they remember your name and you're like, oh, wow, they kind of remembered my name. You'll notice that the master communicators remember people's names. It's an easy little tool to use. Let me give you a strategy of how to remember names, since this might be something new. So when someone first introduced themselves to me, let's say I'm at that brewery and the bartender comes up to me and I'm ready to order my flight. And either they're wearing a name tag or not. Let's pretend that the gentleman is not wearing a name tag. And he says, hey, I'm Kurt. I'm going to take care of you tonight. I'll look at them in their face and repeat in my mind, Kurt, Kurt, Kurt. Okay, Kurt, Kurt's his name. And then I'll imagine what his name looks like when I write it down. And then I'll use Kurt very soon after he told me. Let's replay the situation again. You're at the bar, or if you have some substance use past, well, you can say you're at the coffee shop. And Kurt comes up to you and says, I'm going to be taking care of you tonight. I'll reply, thank you, Kurt. So number one, I'll say Kurt in my mind, and I'll imagine how it looks written down, and then I'll say, thank you, Kurt, because that really hones it in. It really brings it home, and that way you'll remember it better. So I'm using a lot of your senses to remember their name. It's called the name games. Try maybe next time someone waits on you to remember their name, and then when you do it enough, it becomes instinctual. You just will want to know their names because it's almost habitual. Number one was, how do you talk to yourself? Number two was remembering names, because this will leave a positive impression. It's going to make the people around you feel respected and important, and it's a way of recognizing them. So names, you're good at it, you can do it. Number three, listening. Yes, communication involves a lot of listening. Paying attention and being present. This means putting the phone away, sometimes even taking off your Apple Watch or putting it on mute. I don't have one, so I don't really know. But you need to pay attention and be present with someone while they're talking to you. In this day and age, it's not as socially unacceptable to have your phone out with you at all times. Sometimes when I'm talking to someone and I'm in the middle of a story or sharing my opinion or whatever, and they pull their phone up and check it because it went off, or their Apple Watch went off, and they totally check out for, even if it's 2 seconds, and look at their phone. In my mind, I'm kind of like, well, obviously you don't care about what I'm saying, so why am I even saying it? It's pretty rude and disrespectful. So be present. Pay attention. That's it. That part's pretty simple. So we spend about 60% of our communication time listening. Did you know that? That's in a study I read. But we're only remembering 25% of what we heard. So what's that saying? That we're not paying attention. Also, a good thing about listening is to not necessarily listen to respond. So Stephen Covey says this really well. Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. That is big. So can you be present with the person without being like, oh, this is what I want to say. I can't wait to say it. And then you kind of get wrapped around on how you want to say it. And then you kind of check out that way too. So some interesting things. Maybe you do it. Maybe you've seen someone do it. Maybe this has happened to you. These are some good ones. So paying attention, putting the phone away, and being present. Unless you have to say, hold on, my kid's calling. Most people are going to understand. Okay, another part of listening is what we get trained as a therapist to do, is to actively listen. Active listening is something that you do where you sometimes will repeat what you've heard. You'll look the person in the eye. You will sort of smile and nod. You are actively listening to them. To be honest, if you're paying attention and being present, I kind of toss all this active listening away, because if I'm paying attention and being present, I'm already doing all those things. I'm already trying to understand what you're saying to me. I'm already nodding or shaking my head or trying to digest what you're saying. So active listening is important, yes, but if you're just present and paying attention, you're already doing it. Another big one for listening is interrupting. Woo, this is hard. Especially if you're an extrovert like me. We want to say stuff. We have a lot to say. I mean, I have a podcast. I want to talk. But interrupting is telling the person what you have to say is more important. We've all been interrupted before, and we know it doesn't feel good when it happens. So when you get that desire to say something, I want to invite you to do two things. First, this has helped me a lot. Wait until it's an appropriate time to bring up what you want to say. That way you can stay present with the person. You can make that mental note and say, I will bring this up when they're done speaking, when it's more appropriate. Number 2, let the thought enter your head and then let the thought leave. Sometimes and I'm going to build on this a little bit. Sometimes what we really, really want to say doesn't really have anything to do with conversation. It only builds up you. So hear me out. I call this a story on top of a story. And you are going to see this a ton. A lot of teenagers and college kids do this. And I've seen actually a lot of adults do this, unfortunately. But let's talk about it. Let's bring it to the surface and let's talk about it. A story on top of a story. Okay, so this is when you have been so kind. You are sitting there with a friend and you've heard her talk all about her amazing first date. And this sparks an idea in you that you had this awesome first date and you want to tell the story so bad. But you're going to be awesome and you're not going to interrupt and you're going to stay present with her. So she's telling you all about her first date. And in the meantime, you're in your head reminiscing about your date. So you're trying to be present, but you're kind of wrapped up in what's going on. And as soon as she's done telling you about her first date, you launch in about this first date that you had a couple months ago that was even better. You're telling a story on top of hers. And what you're really doing to your friend is taking away all of the attention on her and putting it now on you. What you're trying to say is, I understand what you're saying and I'm trying to connect with you. But what you're really doing is taking the spotlight off her and putting it on you, which is not really the point of the conversation. It's only building you up. But she was the one talking about it in the first place. Does that make sense? Have you heard people do this? I hear a lot of people do this with their kids. They'll want to tell a story about what their baby did, and then the next mama tells a story about what their baby did, and then the next story is about someone else's baby and whatever that mama did with her baby. It's just a story on top of a story on top of a story. It's shallow, and that's where the conversation stays. It doesn't get deeper. It doesn't get richer. It's just a story on top of a story because you're just wanting to word vomit all your stories. And there is a time and place to tell your story, absolutely. But if you're constantly doing this and not actually listening to the person, you're just taking all the attention off of them. Some ways not to do this is to ask more questions about what the person just told you. Cultivate an attitude of curiosity and interest about what they're trying to tell you. If she's talking to you about the first date, ask her how it felt. Ask her what kind of food was there if there was food involved. Ask her if she wants to see the person again. Ask who, what, where, and how questions. Open-ended questions. Dive in a little bit deeper on what she has to say, and stay present and stay with her. And maybe if it is appropriate for you after you've asked her more about her story, maybe then you can say, I've had a similar experience. But first, show some curiosity in her, and that way you get deeper conversations. You'll see Ask those open-ended questions, the who, what, where, how questions. How did that first date make you feel? What did you do? What did you like about that first date? Where would you want to go on your next date? Things like that. And then you can bring up your story. So what do you do about the person who never asks you anything about them and goes on about themselves? We all have a friend like that. Well, that person, as great as he or she may not be the person that you go to when you need to be listened to. Maybe you start to demonstrate some of these communication skills and that person starts to observe what you're doing. But more likely than not, that's not going to be your go-to person to talk. If this person is your spouse or your best friend or your roommate, maybe you bring it to their attention in a gentle way. Hey, I noticed that you haven't really asked me how I'm doing. I've had to bring this up to some of my friends before, and they have done a stellar job now asking me, Laura, how are you doing? Because I'll sit there and listen to them. So sometimes it's okay to say, hey, to be a better friend to me, I'd really appreciate it if you would show some interest sometimes in me. It's a vulnerable thing to ask, but if they are your spouse, your roommate, or your best friend, they're going to want to do it for you. And you don't need to make them feel bad about it. Just ask them to listen to you more. That's totally a reasonable thing to ask. Notice if this is happening in your friendships, with your family members, maybe with your spouse or roommates. Notice if you hear a story on top of a story and no one's really communicating. They're just telling a bunch of stories. A very interesting thing to observe. This is one of the big ones. So remember, the first one was, how do you talk to yourself? Because that transcends how you talk to others. The second one was learn their names. The third one has been this huge topic of listening. And listening starts with being present with the person and not getting too distracted, and to listen, to be curious about them, and to not just be listening to respond. And notice if the story on the top of a story is happening and try to ask more open-ended questions. We have one more to cover. Nonverbal communication. Yes, such a good topic, nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication is what we do with our bodies when we are communicating with people. Did you know 50% of our communication is nonverbal? Nonverbals can be the looks on our face, what we do with our hands, the tone of our voice, things of that nature. It's how we look at someone when they're talking. Do we roll our shoulders in when someone's talking to us, or do we stand with our chest out? There's so many little nuances to this that we'll get into. But nonverbal communication is the fluctuation of our voice and what we're doing with our bodies. And 50% of communication is nonverbal, which is sometimes really hard when you're on the phone or texting or emailing or even on a podcast. Because right now, all you know is my voice fluctuation, which is sometimes why I have to be a little bit more extreme with my fluctuations, because it makes up for you not seeing my hands fly around. I'm a little bit Italian. So first, it's important to become aware of your own nonverbals. Some ways you can do this is to kind of think back and see what people have noticed about you. Have you ever had someone say that you had that resting stink face? Do you often talk with your hands? Are your arms crossed when you're chatting with people? Do you find it awkward to look at them in the eye? The first step is always awareness. So next time you find yourself talking to someone, start to notice what you're doing with your body and your hands. Are your hands across your chest? Are they on your side? Are you whipping your hands around when you talk? Things of that nature. And then ask yourself, do you like your nonverbals? Do you think that they're appropriate? Are they working for you? And if they are, great. Continue on. If they're not, maybe that's something to look at. So let's talk about if you want to improve your nonverbal communication. Body positioning. That's one of the nonverbal strategies that you could use. When a boss is talking to you or someone of certain importance, sometimes people will roll their shoulders in, their eyes go downcast. It's almost this more submissive stance. See if this is what you're doing. And if it is and you don't like it, stand with your shoulders a little bit more up or rolled back. I'm not saying puff out your chest, but maybe just stand with your shoulders a little bit further back. So if you've ever taken a yoga class and they say inhale your shoulders up by your ears, exhale, roll them down your spine, you could do a mini version of that. Eye contact. So eye contact is an interesting thing. Some people find it awkward to look at someone in the eye, and some people are totally fine with it. If you find it awkward to look someone in the eye, sometimes I'll look at someone in the forehead. Not past their head because they're going to think that you're looking past them and something's going on and you're distracted, but look at them in the forehead. And that's totally fine. Also, personal space. This is a good one to go off of when you're talking to someone on their signals. So, personal space is we all have that bubble and that safe space where we like people to be. Some people's bubbles are wide and expansive, and some are non-existent. So it's interesting to first notice where yours is. I don't really care about bubbles. You can put your hand on my shoulder. I'm good with that, but that's not everyone. So what I like to do is try and figure out where the person feels most comfortable. So you'll notice if you are too close, because a person may take a slight step back or they might turn their body away from you. So you can follow that cue to make them feel comfortable and safe. You can also explore where your bubble lies. Do you like it when people are close to you, or are you more take your hand out? It's too close. Also, that personal space, it's okay to not stare someone straight on. It's okay to kind of look at them from a diagonal. It's a little bit more approachable. So we did body positioning, which is roll your shoulders back a little bit, and it's okay to look up. If eye contact makes you feel funny, look at them between the eyes, and you can always glance away and look at them between the eyes again, or on their forehead. Figure out where your personal space and your bubble is and where their bubble is. Pick up on their cues. Start to become aware of what they're doing with their body. The last one is facial expressions. This means maybe smile. This doesn't mean a full-out cheeser, but a slight and warm smile lets the person know that you are happy to communicate with them. If the person has harmed you or made you feel uncomfortable, feel free not to smile, because obviously that's not okay. But if you're just meeting someone or a friend of yours, it's okay to smile a little bit. Our brain has something called mirror neurons that fire, and they are made to mimic or mirror the behaviors happening around you. There's a really cool study done where they took these sweet little babies and they had an adult put their face close to the baby, and when the adult would smile, the baby was more likely to smile. And when the adults frowned, the babies would start to cry. And they measured the mirror neurons going on. These are those neurons firing in your brain that mirror or mimic what's going on around you. So if you're smiling, that person is more likely to smile as well. If you're frowning, same thing. Facial expressions. Like I said, I'm not saying walk around with a huge cheeser on your face or smile when someone's done you dirty. No. This is when you're meeting someone, or it's a friend or a family member. Let's review. So notice your self-talk. Notice if your mood affects your conversations. Try to remember people's names. Look at them and say their name in your head. Imagine what it would look like if you wrote it down, and use their name soon after they told you. Start to listen better. Really hone in on those listening skills. The art of listening is starting to die. Bring it back. Help me bring it back. Be interested and curious about the person you're talking to, because you never know. You can do this in a selfish way. They may teach you something, even if you think they have nothing to teach you at all. Patience could be one of those things. Ask open-ended questions and dive deep into what they're saying rather than just word vomiting your story on top of their story, and that's where the conversation will stay. Notice your nonverbals. Notice if you like them, and if you don't like them, work on a couple of those things that we just talked about, like your body positioning, your eye contact, your personal space, and your facial expressions. So these are some tips, tricks, and strategies to be a master communicator. Start to notice some of that in you. Start to notice it in your surroundings around you. And if you have any other tips or tricks on communicating, I would love to hear from you. You can reach out to me on social media, on the Instagram at practice_compassion. And please, folks, remember it's the holidays. So Practice compassion with your thoughts, because we might be around people who we are not thinking very nice things about. Maybe they're judging you, maybe you're judging them. So work on those compassionate thoughts within yourself. Work on that compassionate language when you're talking to other people in the shopping line and it's busy. Practice that compassionate speech. And remember to take care of yourself with compassionate actions, good rest, good sleep, and good food. Thank you so much for joining me. I will talk to you next week.